now. So our guest speaker is Gerald Hodges. He's the inclusion coordinator with the City of Grand Prairie. Gerald's part of the city manager's office and will work in the community building unity and relationships, and in the city organization cultivating our environment that encourages and supports diversity and inclusion. He previously served in law enforcement for 13 years, 8 with Grand Prairie Police as a school resource officer and detective, and 5 with another agency. Prior to law enforcement, Gerald spent 9 years in education and the social services profession. During that time, Gerald worked with drug prevention support groups from South Dallas to Highland Park, and was an assistant principal for charter schools in South Oak Cliff and Fort Worth. Gerald's currently on the Grand Prairie YMCA board, the board for Cops and Kids Fishing, the TD Foundation, and will be a part of the 2021 Grand Prairie Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Gerald has a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from Texas A&M. Whoop, had to do that. So with all that said, I'd like help me welcome our speaker today, Gerald Hodges. Gerald, take it away.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and as Michelle said, I've served in the community services for quite some time, and I'm really excited about my current position and excited about this series. I've had an opportunity to see some of the other speakers, and it's always good to get an additional perspective to help our understanding when it comes to inclusion. And I hope today's no different. I will share my story, and then as well as at the end, maybe share some things that might help us to further our journey to inclusiveness. To start off, my grandmother, when she passed away, she was 93 years old. And one of the things that I noticed was her hands from doing the manual labor. She used to work in the fields. And one of the crops that they did work in was cotton. And so when they gathered cotton, they would be paid $3 for 100 pounds of cotton. And my grandmother would sometimes gather 200 pounds or more of cotton. During that time, my mother and her siblings helped my grandmother out there in the fields. And that is when my mother made a determination that she was going to get her education. She was like, this labor is not for me. And she made a decision that she was going to go further with her education. She also got involved in the church at a very young age. My mother led youth groups, even as a teenager herself. And it was there in her participation of church that she met my father. My father was in the Army and fought in the Vietnam War. And he did this at a time when neither the war nor African Americans were thought of fondly. And so that caused some conflict as he was in certain neighborhoods. And there's always this misconception that African Americans are unpatriotic, and that's not true. A lot of African Americans have fought in wars in the spirit of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Buffalo Soldiers, and they contributed to America in the hopes to win their respect and to be honored as men. When some of them didn't receive that respect, some of them did become disenfranchised, but if you talk to any of the servicemen, they'll tell you how proud they are of the service that they gave to this country. And so my father was 6'2", 250, and people would often mistake him for Jim Brown. And he lifted weights, he did Taekwondo. He would take walnuts and pecans and put them in the crest of his bicep and forearm, break the shell, and that's how he would eat them. He was an avid reader. He read books from everything from religion to social issues. My mother still has columns of books in his honor, and you can take the books off the shelf and look in them, and you can see the highlights and the notes that he put in the margin. He taught us how to play chess. More accurately, he taught my brothers how to play chess, and they taught me by beating me until I caught up to the curve, in which I still play today. And one of the things, despite him being a strict disciplinarian, he always made us give him a hug before we went to bed. That was part of the requirement. And the reason why I tell you so much about my father is because I want to give you a sense of what we lost September 28th, 1983. Unfortunately, during that date, my dad was killed by a drunk driver. He was teaching my brothers tennis, They were coming home from Cedar Valley College, and they were hit head on by a drunk driver. It killed my father. My brother, my oldest brother, had a broken jaw, punctured his spleen, and then my second oldest brother fractured his femur. And so my mother, very courageously, I remember the police officer being at the front door, and she spoke to the police officer, and then later gathered all three of us around the table to tell us that our father was not coming home anymore. And so she was just a very courageous lady. And so here she was dealing with two of her children in the hospital, concerned about the social and emotional well-being of her other three children, and also balancing this with her own grief. And then afterwards, even after their funeral, she had the challenge of dealing with the stigmatism of being an African-American lady with 5 kids, because there was a lot of assumptions that people made. I remember people being surprised that we all had the same father. I remember going to a school function. It was like open house, meet the teachers. And the teacher said, "Wow, you have 5 kids and none of them in jail." And even as a child, I was thinking to myself, surely the standard has to be better than that. And it was just amazing to me. Some of the things that you hear from people. I remember a classmate distinguishing the difference that, of course, I'm very dark skinned. My mother's very fair skinned, and pointing out that fact. And of course, my mother was not very happy. But my mother did find support in the church. And my mother was very wise. And she told us, even at a young age, she said, "Listen, I can't be your father and your mother, but I will be the best mother that you ever have." And she was, and she still is to this day. And so church provided a lot of things for us, taught us how to be, it gave us mentorship, taught us how to be better people, and also make our communities better. And so when we went to church, we saw these men who were dressed up, they owned businesses, they were fathers. And so they were role models for us. And then we also were learning how to be better people every day. My mother, when we had Christmas and Easter programs, she would make us speak. We always had to remember Easter speech. We always had to remember a Christmas speech. But it was her way of getting us comfortable in speaking in front of people. And then she would take us out and we would visit nursing homes. We would cut the yards for senior citizens. Sometimes we would just sit down and listen to them, feed the homeless. And so it got us thinking beyond ourselves. The other place that we found support was school. And I remember my teachers, Miss Haney, Miss Ross, Miss Smith, and I can't remember everything they said, but I remember how I felt in their classrooms. I felt like I could achieve, and I felt safe. But conversely, though, there were teachers that did not make me feel that way. I remember a coach, and I won't say his name, but this coach taught world geography. And he was not a coach that embraced the academic obligations of his job. And so I was blessed that I did whatever my brothers did, and my brothers were very responsible. My oldest brother is a talented artist. He draws, and I still draw to this day. My second older brother, Ethan, he loved to read books and do push-ups, and so I read books and I do push-ups. So I was just very grateful that my brothers were good role models. They weren't involved in gangs and drugs, and that saved me. And so my mother made an investment in encyclopedias, and she made an investment in National Geographic. And so she always kept reading material around the house, and that was important to her as an investment. And so I remember reading plate tectonics, how scientists would use lasers to measure the movement of plate tectonics. And we were in class with this coach. And so we were on the subject of plate tectonics. I raised my hand. Of course, I'm excited because I've been reading on the subject. And when I shared that, this coach, because he never heard of it, began to belittle and embarrass me in the class. And so to the amusement of the class, he totally embarrassed me. And at that point, it was war, Because when you feel helpless to authority of someone, you begin to empower yourself in ways that are contrary to the system. And that's what I did. And so there were many times we had unhealthy banter. I was outside in the hallways several times, and I just remember the feeling in that classroom that it was just contentious. And so, but it also showed me that that coach was willing to accept African Americans as athletes, but he was not willing to accept African Americans as intellectuals. And so many times, as we see in society, the challenge is that people have certain places that they think that you should be and that you should achieve, um, and that your achievement should be known for. And there's a lot of people that they love LeBron James and Emmett Smith, but they struggle with their coworkers, or they struggle communicating with their neighbors. And so sometimes bias is not merely based on race and culture, but position in society. And that kind of was a theme throughout my life. I remember, of course, as you know, Michelle, being from A&M, the proud moment it is when you get your Texas A&M ring. And so I had my ring, and I was in line at a store, and a young man there proceeded to tell me that how he did not make it into Texas A&M. And so when he saw my ring, he said, "Hey, you're an A&M?" I said, "Yeah, I go to A&M." And he was like, "Well, did you play football?" And I was like, "No, I didn't play football." "Did you play basketball?" "No, I didn't play basketball." "Did you run track?" I said, "No." And he said, "You didn't play any sports?" I was like, "No, I didn't play any sports." And I was an athlete in the sense of, when I was in college, yeah, I could jump and touch the top of the white square above the rim. I did hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups, and this is no insult to the people who use their talent to pay for their education. But it was an insult to me if you thought that was the only way that I could do it. Because I had worked very hard to turn around a dismal high school career to get my college education. I remember in community college, I would work 7:30 to 4:30 in the warehouse, and then my brother would pick me up. I would take off my dirty T-shirt, put on a clean T-shirt, go to class from 5:45 to 10 o'clock, study, and repeat. And I did that until I finally worked my way up into working in student services at the school. And then with my grades, and then it's a thing, who's who in community college. I made the list for who's who in community college. And I was also part of the Black Student Association, which I was president of. And then I got accepted to Texas A&M based on that. And so when I went to A&M, I did not have housing when I first arrived there. And so I knew I absolutely had to have an education. There was no doubt about it. And so I slept on my brother's dorm room floor for the first couple of weeks because I was like, I'm not going home. I have to get an education. My brother, who is a talented piano player, he played at some of the local churches. And one of the pastor's wives, Wanda Williams, sat down and convinced one of the deacons to give me a room and also give me a job in the cafeteria on campus. And so he sold me a Rustico bike for $10. So I would ride that bike to campus, work my cafeteria job. And this is why to this day, I just make it a point not to be dismissive to servers and people who are in all types of jobs, because I know what that's like to be dismissed. And afterwards, I would ride back to off campus. But of course, in true Texas fashion, you would get there in t-shirts and a shorts. And then at the end of the night, it would be sub-zero weather. And so I remember one time having to take my socks off and put them on my hands so they didn't freeze while riding back to where I stayed. And of course my college buddies do not let me live that down, but you do what you have to do. But it was an important time in my life because I learned that words are greater than numbers. Words are greater than numbers. Because even as a young man, I knew the probability and the statistics for the survival of African American young men. But once I believed the words of Mrs. Ross that said, hey, you have a greater purpose, I believe the words of my church that you can overcome regardless of any obstacle. And then I believe the words of my mom that we will achieve regardless. We will achieve regardless. I remember one time I tried to take a few left turns in my life, and my mother was spanking me emphatically, persuading me that that was not going to happen. And while she was spanking me, she said, um, they say we're a large family and every family has to have a black sheep. And that because we're a large family, we're going to lose one to the streets. And she said, I will not. We will not. And not only did she say it with her words, she proved it with her actions. My mother, who was a single mother of 5 kids, went back to school and is now the proud graduate of the University of North Texas. So she not only did it, and one of the things I tell parents, I say, kids watch more than they listen. And we watched the actions of our mothers, which left us with no excuse as to why we could not achieve. Even to this day, I communicate that to my son, that we will never say we didn't succeed because we will say we succeeded despite. So we'll acknowledge the challenges that we have in this world, but we will find a way to overcome it. And it's one of the reasons why we're working with young men right now to give them those words so they can be greater than the numbers that they see. But college taught me hard work and education. And I knew there was 2 things that I have to have, because hard work gives you the strength to open the door when opportunity knocks. And education gives you the vision to understand it when you see it. And so college afforded that opportunity. But college was also the place that I learned that misunderstanding and sometimes bias was not only based on race and culture, but also could be based on social economics. And I had a young man, and I'll call him Jay. And so Jay was of Indian descent. Jay had a black girlfriend. Jay was part of a black fraternity. And during this time in Texas A&M, the Hopwood case was a hot topic. And the Hopwood case was when Cheryl Hopwood sued the University of Texas Law School for reverse discrimination. And of course, because of the subject matter, it brought some eloquent and not so eloquent discussions where people expressed their own implicit biases on campuses. And so John also spoke out against that. Now, both of John's parents were doctors. Both, he rode in a red BMW. He had an ATM that he didn't check the balance. And his parents bought him and his sister a house in College Station so they can go to school. And so I had finally worked my way from the cafeteria. Now I worked loss prevention in a library. And basically it was like my first enforcement job, if you will, because then I had to walk around, make sure people didn't eat, they didn't bring food into the library, they didn't run off with materials. And while I'm sitting there at the desk, John comes in and he sees me, and Jay says, hey, he says, is this where you work? I said, yeah, this is where I work. He said, why don't you get a real job? And I was like, well, because I needed my real job, I didn't address him the way I felt like addressing him. And in hindsight, though, it's real important why we have these forums such as this and the American Experience series in which the library has going on. I invite you to check that out as well, because John didn't know my story. He didn't know where I came from. He was sleeping in a house while I was sleeping on a dorm room floor. I was riding around a rustic gold bike and he was riding a BMW. So it was very tough for him to be able to relate to that. I came from a single parent household. He came from a household of 2 doctors. And so that's why I began to understand why dialogue is important and sharing our story is important, to give people that understanding. And maybe they won't make assumptions and be cavalier about some of their actions. But to be fair to him, I also have my own implicit bias, and my perceptions that I had to overcome because of the experiences that I had in life. You know, when I was growing up, if I saw anybody in Western wear, cowboy hats, boots, Wranglers, I was real suspect because of the experiences that I had. I remember a young man in the seventh grade who was trying to spit on me from the bleachers and calling me the N word. And then I also remember um, when I was in summer school and a history teacher showed the movie Glory. And Glory is about the 54th Regiment. They were the first Black battalion during the Civil War. And while she was showing that movie, a young man made an inappropriate comment. And it caused a great divide between African Americans and the Caucasian students to the point that it was boiling into something physical. And I just remember a young man driving up there with a pickup truck, and he went out and he started inspecting the 4x4s on our behalf as if to intimidate us. And then when I was on campus, I was going to the store with my friends, and a truck drove by, called us the N-word, and me and my friends were kind of hoping that it stopped at the stoplight so that we could address this properly, but it did not. So it was a lot of different experiences that made me real questionable when I saw somebody in that type of apparel. So I'm working my loss prevention job, and in walks in Mike Epps. And Mike Epps, boots, the Wranglers, the whole 9 yards. He probably would have wore a hat, but of course, we know at A&M, you don't wear hats in the building. And we honor that. So Mike starts asking me these questions. Mike's like, "How you doing? What's your major?" And I'm looking at Mike a little skeptical because of the experiences that I had. And I remember leaving to do what we would call a patrol, to walk around the library. And he said to one of my coworkers, he was like, "Well, what'd I say to offend him?" So I had to kind of reflect myself and begin to realize that I needed to give him a chance. And he turned out to be a nice guy. Now he was doing environmental science. He wanted to go off and take care of golf courses. And then as I also began to reflect, my brother's roommate, Courtney, who kind of wore that same apparel, was the same one who allowed me to graciously sleep on my brother's dorm room floor. And his parents, his dad was actually a civil rights attorney and had dinner with my family. And they were very nice and gracious people. And so it is my hope that, you know, as I live my life, that I also help people to challenge their stereotypes and their norms, you know, with my work ethic, my intellect, and my character. But I needed those men. I needed those men who look like me in my life so that I could understand my potential for success. I needed those men who did not look like me to enter my life so I could understand the potential for peace. And so everyone does have a role to play. And sometimes our people of color, our young men of color, they do need representation, but they also need other men in their life to show them that there is a potential for us to all come together successfully and peacefully. So there's always a role for people to play. And so when I look back over my life, I'm definitely grateful. And one of the things I tell people is we're blessed not to make it, but to make a difference. And that has always been the driving force in my profession. And that is the driving force to what I currently do today. And so one of the things that I would challenge people, that if you're wanting to further your journey to inclusion, hear people's stories. And the first goal to that is reserve being offended. The only way that we're going to have a conversation, you're first going to have to reserve being offended. Allow people to speak. And of course, we all know what the intention is behind it, but give them an opportunity so that we can have those dialogues that allow us to bridge to understanding. I remember being in uniform, directing traffic, and I had done so and waved to the kids and speak to the parents. And I remember this older white lady who had waved to me several times. She started bringing her kids up to speak to me. And she told me, she said, "Officer Hodges, can I be honest with you?" I said, "Yes, be honest with me." She said, I'm not a racist. It's always interesting. You always brace yourself when a conversation starts off with, I'm not a racist. But she said, we just never dealt with Black people before. She said, I didn't have any feelings towards it, but she said, you're the first Black person I've ever dealt with. And I said, well, you're doing great. You're, you're doing just fine. And so allowing people to conversate and to kind of bring out those things that they didn't know so that we can answer those questions and bridge those gaps. And so the other thing is community service is another way. And that's one of the reasons why the city of Grand Prairie, we currently have Friendship Day, where we are compensating city employees 4 hours a day to do community service throughout the city of Grand Prairie. And the reason being is it helps them to get to know the diverse population, and it does help our diverse population to get to know our city employees, and that always brings understanding. I always encourage people that's a good place to start if you want to start learning and being more inclusive, because one, you have an ambassador there. You have somebody who has served in that community who can kind of usher you through there and show you things and point out different things and help you to learn that community kind of in a safe space. And then also community service is a good way for us to introduce our children to different lifestyles, to different socioeconomic background. One of the things that I've learned is I cannot create the environment that created me, and nor would I want to do that for my children. But one of the things that I do to make sure that they're not entitled is that they have an understanding of life and the different things that life may bring you. And so community service is a way for us to show our children just different lives and the way that different people live, so that they don't have the entitlement, and also that they grow up with an understanding of other people as well. And so this is my journey to inclusion. And you can always put the website in there, some other programs that we have that you can check out as well. And hopefully something was said that helped your perception and help your journey to inclusiveness. And so if you guys have any questions, I'm available.
Thank you so much, Gerald. Man, like I was saying before, you can never peg anybody. You don't know people until, you just don't. Yeah, let's open the floor. Does anybody have any questions for Gerald? If change it from speaker mode. I know I've got a bunch. Greg, did you just wave your hand? You're muted. Just as a reminder, everybody's muted right now. No, Greg. Greg went away. Okay. Well, so one thing I was going to ask you or talk to you about, Gerald, was so I think I'm so glad that you had the emotional intelligence to be able to stand back, like you were telling the story about, wearing the Western wear. You had this idea from experience. And then when you found out that guy was wondering what he had done to offend you, you had the emotional intelligence to evaluate, am I reacting properly? Did he actually do anything? And I think that's so important and across all the board. I think everyone in the United States almost could benefit from really working on some emotional intelligence and not being just reactionary. You know what I mean? Yes. So another kudos to you, and boy, oh boy, we should have had your mother on with you. I'll tell you. That's the lady I want to meet.
Yes, well, maybe one day you can meet her.
I would love to meet her.
Yes, but you're so right. You have to take a stance back, and I think also it's a good foundation. Like I said, when we went to church, it was always teaching us to be reflective. That's what it does. It constantly asks you who you are and who you need to be better. And so I think that was a very strong foundation for us. I think also that one of the things that we talked about at the conference with Pastor Smith, choose your friends according to your aspirations and not your addictions. And I think in doing that, and one of the things that we did at Texas A&M University, we have what was called a Black male support group. and meeting with other young men who have familiar stories. Some of them didn't have fathers. Some come from various backgrounds, but we were also accountability partners into the growth and our success. I have a friend of mine, Bernard Brandon, who's currently an engineer. And Bernard came from New York, and Bernard is one of those uncanny people that also bench presses 500 pounds. And I was sitting in my dorm room one day, and I was just relaxing, and Bernard comes by and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm sitting down." He said, "Well, let's go study." I said, "Okay." And you know, when someone bench presses 500 pounds and they encourage you to study, you go with it. And so we were accountability partners for each other for our success.
Well, and then another thing that you said too was, you know, that you were lucky enough to have men to look up to, good men in your life, and people who looked like you. And that was important, doing good things and being honorable and just doing the right stuff. And I just wanted to make the comment, I mean, you recently were called the inclusion coordinator, but I know just even from my personal experience with you, your title started years and years ago. I just wanted to put that out there. I mean, you've done so much for so many just in being you. So I'm just so appreciative of you being here. And I'm so glad that now, given it's just like anything where you have a platform, you now have a new platform, and now you have the ability to reach even more people, a different audience than you may have been able to before in your previous position. So I'm so happy for you and our community as a whole that you are the first of this title and that it is you. So I just wanted to say that too. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Can I try now?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead, Greg.
Okay. Gerald, that was great. You have a strong mother. So did I. That's a big part of life. That's what a lot of the kids are missing nowadays. And when I was in high school, my baseball and hockey coach taught geography. That's what they all used to do. And I didn't get along with him either in school.
So Gerald, how old were you when you were in that class and all that happened with that teacher?
It was my sophomore year, and I think that it's kind of a pivotal year because your peers matter at that point. And so when you get embarrassed in front of your peers, it's a pivotal moment. I think it also speaks, and one of the reasons why when I got into education, I tried to make sure that every kid was valued. And it didn't matter if they were athletes, if they were artists, if they were intellectuals. I try to make it a point when I was in education to try to relate to all kids and to take time with each student, regardless of what their gift was. So it was something that experience helped me to change my approach with kids. And so I heard someone once said that life is like a tapestry, and that on one side you see the muddled material put together and the loose strings, but you really don't see the beautiful picture until you get to the other side. And so that's just one of the things that I see when I see my life.
Well, and you said something else that I thought was really important too, was that it was the things that you remember the most were the things that you felt. And I think, and you haven't talked about this really, but you know, I think a lot of the things that are going on with regard to whether it's gangs or whether it's far left or right groups, whatever the case may be, or just falling into the bad crowd, it's, I think, and correct me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, it's how kids or adults even are feeling when they feel that they belong, when they feel that they're accepted. And it might be bad, just like you talked about. But what was memorable to you and the thing that really sticks out is the feeling that you mentioned.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's important for parents to understand that a lot of young men grew up with, if you meet them, they're great young men. And the ones who didn't make it were great young men. I remember Of course, being a family of 5, sometimes money's a little tight. And I remember complaining about that to a friend of mine. And he, in well-meaning, said, well, hey, I know a guy. And if you're struggling with money, I can hook you up with this guy. And basically, you start selling for him to make some money. This was not a person who was in a trench coat. This was not someone who had horns and a pitchfork. This was my friend who looked out for me, told jokes, so it is that sense of belonging that we have to make sure that we also create that for our kids, but then we also not just merely demonize other things, but give them positive things to attach themselves to, and give them a future perspective. And that's one of the things that we also, that happens when you have that mentor relationship, is because for a kid is thinking about today. The advantage that we have for adults, and what I tell my son, is that you can benefit from my experiences without my consequences. And that is one of the things that every adult has to offer to a young man or a young lady, is that, one, that you can give them that sense that they are cared for, but you also can give them that future perspective and save them some consequences in their life.
Right. Anybody else have any comments or questions for our speaker today?
Michelle, Susanna had put some really couple of good questions in the comments section.
Okay, thanks so much for bringing my attention. So Susanna was asking, what are some of the biases and experiences your kids are facing now, and how are you and your wife navigating those discussions?
One, you have to, like my mom did, you have to decide what is going to be the themes in your household. And that's kind of the foundation for how you address things. And one of our themes in our household is that, we're a Christian family, God first, and then education. And so we kind of use those to navigate the discussion. And once again, with my son, being aware of those challenges, but we will not let those challenges define us. And one of the toughest part about being a good person or a godly person is that you have to have tough skin without having a hard heart. And that's one of the things that we teach our kids, is that we want you to have tough skin, but never let the actions of others harden your heart. And I think you have to have those discussions so that they can process those things with your guidance. And sometimes we can tend to stray away from tough conversations. But if we do that, then we allow someone else to educate our kids on those matters. And they may not do it in the manner which is productive as us. And so also, I think it's important to note is that we ourselves, one of the challenges that I tell people that allow me to rise to a different standard was, I want to be the man I want my son to be, and be the man that I want my daughter to marry. And so looking at that standard pushes you beyond what you would settle for yourself. And so we also have to look at, who are we surrounding ourselves with? Because our tough part may be that we're not telling the joke, the inappropriate jokes, but if we're hanging around people and we're allowing and accepting them to make comments, and we're accepting them to make actions, and by our silence, our kids see that as approval because we didn't address it. And so as adults, I think we also have to up our standards to say that, what am I modeling for my kids? What do I allow people to say in front of me? What jokes do I allow my friends? What actions do I allow my friends to do, or even my family members, in front of my kids that I don't address, that is saying that it's okay to behave in a certain manner?
And, I think that brings about some kind of an importance to, you can't, I think you model this well, that you cannot stand by idly in life. You have to be passionate in the pursuits, passionate in your beliefs. You wouldn't have ridden that rusty bike and slept on the floor if you weren't, if you weren't passionate about those things. And you don't stand up for yourself if you're not passionate for your beliefs. So again, just another great thing that you're modeling, and that, I think that is missing for a lot of kiddos out there, and some adults as well.
Yes.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Did I see you, Pastor Smith? Were you wanting to talk? Oh, I think he's typing. Okay. One thing I did want to mention real quick, and I know I don't mean to talk so much, but you know, we went to the same school. We both went to A&M, and one time when I was probably a freshman, I was at the MSC, the Memorial Student Center, and was with my roommate who was Hispanic and her best friend from high school who was a young black girl. And we walked into a meeting, and I was just kind of standing there waiting. And I had friends growing up of all different Indian, Asian, Black, Hispanic. It didn't, you know, I was lucky to have a great mix of friends. But I remember standing in the back of the room, and I think it was like, I can't remember, but it was like Black Aggies group. And while I was waiting in the back of the room for whatever I was waiting for, they asked the group, how many of you feel like you are welcome on this campus? And it hurts me even to talk about it right now. And like a majority of the room raised their hand, and I was just shocked. And I think too, because I was fortunate enough to live and have these friends and you brought it up earlier too, that you have to give people a chance, because maybe their life experiences did not include, one, knowing that everyone is human and that you should accept everyone, and two, having experienced that truth. And so that was a really enlightening moment, and it was really heartbreaking too. But I think you addressed it earlier too, and it's just such a message that I just have to remember in dealing with people who are negative towards us, whatever the case may be, and then moving forward in a positive fashion like you do. So.
And I think, Michelle, that's a good point. I think too that we have to remember that going to a college campus is daunting for any student. And especially when you put on there that some of the issues that students have to deal with in terms of a place that may not be diverse as a place that they were used to coming from. And so that support and giving support to those students. And I think also the power we have in the role of education to empower students and to kind of light that fire. And it is amazing the amount of students, and sometimes it's hard, and that's why these forums are important, because and the thing I tell people is that sometimes people are very offended and they say, how I don't see these challenges in America, are these being overstated and overemphasized? And one of the things I share with people is, as a police officer, I remember having a child make an outcry and in tears and filling out a report and talking to detectives while their sibling was in the other room defending the parent who was the offender. Now, here we have two kids who are under the same roof, who having two totally different experiences in the house. And I tell that to people to say, just imagine how varied our experiences can be in America. And so even me as an African American, I don't minimize anybody's story, because our life experiences are so varied that we couldn't possibly. And that's why I say reserve the right to be offended. Reserve it just for a little bit and give people opportunity to tell their story, because we're all coming from so many different places.
Exactly. I appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Gerald? We are so lucky to have had him. And again, he's such a huge part of our community. And if this is the first time that you are getting a chance to meet him, well, today was your lucky day. I don't think he's going to be going away. In fact, we'll probably see him more and more as time goes on, and especially after COVID and the picture. But we are so grateful to each and every one of you for making the time. Pastor, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I wanted to tell Gerald that awesome story. He's a great brother. I'm glad to have him as the inclusion officer. He spoke at our church with some young men and that was just all any young man. We had from age 12 to 22. And to this day, this was about a couple, maybe 3 weeks ago, I've had a young man that has asked and said that he wanted to get away from some things. And it was because of what Gerald talked about, is not allowing others to dictate in his life. So he came to us and asked us for some assistance, and we gave him that assistance and given him that assistance. I want to tell Gerald, thank you, because to allow those young men to come in and to be able to hear you in your offices and just speak clearly and openly, we appreciate that. So it's awesome job.
Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, and Pastor really communicated something that I also want to let the audience know, is that we have great community partners, and we do our best to be responsive as a city. Pastor came to us with some concerns and being concerned for these young men, and we want to do our best to partner with our community partners. Grand Prairie is a great city where we have so many people that want to be involved in the community. And if you have an idea, and if you reach out to us with a concern, we definitely want to respond, because you guys are doing some great work out there that we as a city want to be a part of. I think in this particular climate that we're in now, that if we remember that to take care of one another, and that will supersede any polarizing politics or propaganda. If at the root of it is, I want to take care of you, you want to take care of me, we may not agree how to do that. But if we do that, then I think we'll have a long-standing relationship with anybody. And so I want to commend the pastor and all these. I look at the audience and I see all these people that are so involved in the community, and that's what it takes. That when our relationships are so tightly wove together, then our kids and our youth, they can't fall through the cracks. So thank you guys.
Well, we appreciate you so much, Gerald. There are lots of comments in the chat thanking you and talking about how great your talk today is, and how
thank them. Thank you.
The community is. So pleased to have you in your position. Are there any other comments before we close out today?
Let me say this before we close out, that just like I said, words are greater than the numbers. But I also want us to remember that they're not just numbers. Their lives and their families. And one of the things I often emphasize to people, the urgency for us, is that kids and people, they do not succeed in isolation, and they do not fail in isolation. And so when they succeed, the world is eagerly awaiting their talents and their gifts, and is in desperate need of their gifts. And then in the same manner that when they fail, they're taking families with them, some cases, unfortunately, victims. And so let that be the motivation for us to have every child succeed, and when we can, help our neighbor.
Wonderful. And Matthew, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I do. Gerald, good seeing you again.
Good to see you.
You know, I just think we are very blessed to be in the city of Grand Prairie. I think city of Grand Prairie and the leadership took a proactive, being proactive and have a inclusion coordinator such as Gerald is a tremendous, it's just tremendous for our city. And you know what really touched me yesterday, Gerald, when you and I had our lunch, that you reached out to me and tried to include the Asian in this as well, because I have businesses in many different cities. In city of Grand Prairie, and for you guys to, you know, when you're talking about inclusive, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the Asian community out there in Plano, Dallas, Arlington, we many times felt left out, even as a minority group. That's just how we felt. For whatever reason, we have always been categorized as the model minority, but we suffer the same pain that every ethnic group does. There are a lot of domestic violence in the Asian community, especially for the ladies, we don't speak out. And there are a lot of Asians who are extremely poor and not able to achieve what, you know, the American dream that I believe I have achieved. But for you to come out
Can I
and
go over
talk
this
with
way and
me,
go up the steps? Well, right here. I just
so,
want to
and
hold
so
on.
that meant a lot to me, Gerald. And again, if there's anything I can do for our city, just count me in. I'm all about inclusivity. Every event we host here, we want to include everybody. And I'm just very thankful to be in the city of Prairie.
Thank you. And Matthew, you know, my brother now, you know, he says Chris Brickman is his brother, but I'm gonna have to steal you from Chris. Thank you, number one, for welcoming me. You know, when I offered that hand and he took me to, if you haven't been over there to eat, you must. He blessed me with a meal, and you know, I need to take my wife over there. But absolutely, we want to make sure that everybody feels included and that everybody is able to come to the table, because the value of what you bring, Matthew, and as well as your constituents, the people that you represent. You know, the Asian community is a very important part of our community. And our goal is to try to remove those barriers that hinder us. And one of the things that I tell people, and me and Matthew were having this conversation, is that Grand Prairie is on route to be a premier city because you're able to maintain a certain lifestyle and quality of life while being in a diverse community. And not every city is able to say that. And so if you ever have any need, like I said, we want to respond. We want to be a part of that. And we definitely want to make sure that all of our brothers and sisters are taken care of. And one of the things that I tell people is that the most underrepresented group in America is good people. And there's so many of us that have that in common. And so we need that better represented. And also, it also leads us to be a little bit more vocal for the sake of the country. So thank you, Matthew.
All right. Do we have any other comments before we wrap up? Well, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Gerald has been a fantastic addition to our journey to inclusiveness. We will have more in the future, but I just want to kind of marinate in the wonderfulness that was today. We can, if you need to connect with him, you are welcome to email us here at the chamber, and I think you also put your contact info in the chat. And so let me ask you one last question, because it's not clear to me. So I know you were a police officer originally. Are you still, or are you only working in this role for the city? Or do you know?
I'm currently kind of in a transition spot where I'm still under the umbrella of the police department, but now my role is branching out to where we're doing things throughout the city. And so that's where we're transitioning to, we're going to further that community work throughout the home.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you again. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. His email address is ghodges@gptx.org. And there's also a section of the city's website that's gptx.org/inclusion. And I appreciate you all for joining us here at the Grand Prairie Chamber of Commerce. And please check back on our calendar and our website, grandprairiechamber.org, for future journeys to inclusiveness and other programs. So thank you so much and have a great week.
Thank you.